Hey, welcome to Bride Arrays this week, and we are looking at a study called Led by the Right Way. We're looking at Genesis 24, starting in verses, we're looking at verses 28 through 67. So last week we started looking at the story of the search for a wife of Isaac, and so this week we're going to continue that story in our two-part study of this chapter. Now, we're closing in on the end years of Abraham, and his death is quickly approaching in the story. We've already seen that this final story in the life of Abraham is centered upon his son. The question that is coming is what will happen to the chosen line? What's going to happen with that? We know there's a promise. Will the promise come true? Will the promise continue in the next generation? In Genesis 24, 1 through 9, we saw Abraham give the command to his servant to go out and to find a wife for his son. We already know who this woman is because Moses had told us who she was, kind of clued us in back in chapter 22 when he mentioned the fact that Abraham found out that Nahor had children and that he had grandchildren. And so Moses told us in chapter 22 that there was a guy named Bethuel who fathered Rebekah. But, of course, Abraham and his servant did not know that this was going to be, Isaac's wife. They knew about the family, they knew who was in the family, but they didn't know that Rebekah was the chosen one to be Isaac's spouse. So in verses 10 through 27, we saw the description of the servant's trip. And we saw him go out and travel across Canaan, really, all the way up into Mesopotamia. Gets to that well in the city of Nahor, in the land there, and we saw what happened. And we heard the prayers of the faithful servant, and we saw the providence of God. Rebekah just happened, right, to be the first young woman to arrive at the well when the servant arrived. She just happened to be there, right? If you stop and think about how many events that transpired over the length of the servant's journey, even just the day of their meeting, think of all those things that had to align. It really staggers the mind. This week we have about three more sections to study in this story of the servant and Rebekah. So in verses 28 through 53, we find the servant's interaction with Rebekah's family as he recounts everything that just happened. He goes through the whole story again. And then we see the response from everyone, which is, this is from the Lord. Then the second part is in 54 through 58. The servant asks to return home with Rebekah immediately. That's his thing. Her response is, I will go. And then finally in verses 59 through 67, we find the description of Isaac and Rebekah's meeting and their marriage. The blessing of Rebekah's family is, may you become thousands of 10,000s. Now, as we continue through the story, there are several things that we need to keep in mind. First, this is not just a story about some Middle Eastern man looking to arrange a marriage for his bachelor son. Ultimately, this is a story of how the promise of God to send an offspring of the woman to crush the serpent's head would come about. This is about the providence of God and how everything is under the governance of the King of Kings. And it's about saving faith, which is a gift of God, so that no one, including Abraham, could boast in himself. God has used, He's used different things in Abraham's life. He's used trials, He's used tests, He's used, monumental decisions in his life. And He's actually used pagan kings as tools to really grow Abraham's faith, to grow and to, establish that foundation, that legacy, that heritage that would continue on, would be passed on to his offspring, passed on to Isaac. And that's what we see here in this story. The faith of Abraham that God has given to him, that God has grown, that God has, cultivated in the heart of Abraham And then we see that being passed on even to the servant who is in Abraham's household. And then we'll see that in later stories how it's passed on to Isaac. And ultimately, yes, even in Jacob. So that's what our plans are for this week. Continue looking at this story. So come back next time and we'll start the first section. We'll look at verses 28 through 53. And we'll look at the study called This is from the Lord.